And welcome back to State of the Commonwealth. Today we're talking about one issue that Governor Bevin has brought to the forefront of his campaign for re-election: pro-life versus pro-choice. And joining me this morning are Marcy Krim, the Executive Director of the Kentucky Health Justice Network, and Kent Ostrander with the Family Foundation. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So first of all, I'm going to start with why are you here? Tell me about your story. And Marcy, we'll start with you and also your position on the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the Executive Director of Kentucky Health Justice Network, and so we are Kentucky's reproductive justice organization. We're statewide, and our largest program is helping folks access abortion. So we help Kentuckians, and actually sometimes outside the state, but help Kentuckians pay for abortions. We also have about 60 volunteers who do transport, so we're like crisscrossing the state every day, taking folks to the clinic in Louisville and then also sometimes outside the state. We also help people who pay for child care when they're having the procedure done, because the majority of people who get abortions are already parents, and also language interpretation as well. So, and then we obviously also advocate for abortion access in Frankfort and then just everywhere.
Okay, and Kent, the same question to you.
I'm the Executive Director and founder of the Family Foundation. We opened our doors in 1990, and I'm just about diametrically opposed to Marcy's position. We protect the family and the values that make families strong, and the sanctity of life is one of them. One of the questions we want to ask is, if the absence of a heartbeat indicates death, what does the presence in the womb at 18 days after conception indicate? We would advocate that it advocates that there's life there.
And we'll start off with you, Kent. How do you feel about the direction Kentucky is moving toward restricting abortion access?
Well, I think it's just a natural progression, because the Democrats in the early 90s, when we opened our doors, many of them were pro-life. Representative Lewis Johnson out of Owensboro, or Bill Donnemeyer of Northern Kentucky. But they continued to move further and further left, so that in the year 2000, Republicans took over the Senate. And then in 2016, there was a massive overturn of the Democrats in the House. Part of that was because of the belligerent pro-choice stand that the Democrats were maintaining in both chambers and ultimately in the House. So it was a coup d'etat, if you will. They turned it over, and I believe then that the sanctity of life issue will play an important role in this particular question we're talking about now, the election of the governor.
And Marcy, how do you feel about the direction that Kentucky's moving, and how much harder has it made you for your organization to help women?
It's actually made it a little bit easier to help people access abortion, because more people are donating to our organization, and so we have more funds to help people pay for abortion. So Kentuckians have reacted by donating to support abortion, which has been great, except we're having to get more people out of the state. So one of the biggest impacts that we've seen of all these laws being passed is that they've created barriers that have made it harder and harder for people to access abortion in Kentucky. So it's more expensive. There's only one clinic, so the distance, to get to the clinic in one day, the 24-hour bill, all of those things have pushed people to getting abortions later and later, which is, I'm sure that's not what the folks in Frankfort and not what someone like Kent would like, but that is what they're doing, is they're creating situations in which people are going to leave the state because they've had to get their abortions later. So where I think Kentucky is moving is obviously backwards. It's interesting because in countries around the world where abortion is illegal or extremely hard to access, the World Health Organization reports about 220,000 children are left motherless every year because their mothers died from unsafe abortions. That's not, in my opinion, leaving children as orphans because their mothers tried to self-abort. That's not very pro-family or pro-life.
And Kent, your response?
Well, if we are a culture that begins killing our offspring for our own preferences, then we're going to be a dying culture. We've become almost a culture of death because of what the Supreme Court did with Roe versus Wade. Like a fiat, they passed a law, no legislator voted for it. They just laid down the law of the land and overturned Kentucky's laws and the laws of all the states of America. And that's not the way it should be. This trend towards states passing new regulations makes sense because we're a democracy.
And Ken, I want to stick with you for just a second. We talked about criticisms that men and women may face in this issue in particular. Now, Carolina brought up a point that a lot of these are men that women feel like are telling them what to do. If a woman comes up to you and asks you, it's not your right to tell them what to do with their body, how they feel, how do you respond to that?
Well, the fact of the matter is there is a heartbeat. There's a living organism within a woman when she's pregnant. What kind of organism is it? It's a human being. And the fact that some are advocating that you can terminate that life right up to the moment of birth just does not make sense. You move that child 6 inches down and all of a sudden it's a human being. The Supreme Court in Roe versus Wade said we don't know when life begins. Well, 40 some odd years have passed and we have a lot more information. It's a human life with its own DNA, with its own retinal scan, its own voice within the womb, and it's going to be different than any other human being on the earth, and no one should have the right to terminate the life of another human being who is innocent.
Marcy, your response.
Well, I mean, it's so interesting. One, it is funny to, no disrespect, but to be sitting at a table with two people who cannot get pregnant and to be having this discussion when it doesn't actually impact anyone who can't get pregnant in a real personal way. But yeah, so science has shown over and over again, and real scientists who are non-political and they're just doing the work, that no, at 8 weeks, 16 weeks, there is not a thinking, feeling being inside our bodies. And it's also funny, it's like, I want to say, Kent, when's your birthday?
April 10th.
So when's your conception day?
About 9 months before that.
Actually, that would have been about 10 months before that.
Fair enough.
No,
all depends how you calculate it.
Right. We don't actually celebrate when someone was conceived because that's hard to pinpoint and that's not how the world works. We celebrate birthdays because that is when we as people come into the world. So there's a reason for that. And also, abortion didn't begin when Roe v. Wade passed. Abortion wasn't, 1973 everyone wasn't running out to get abortions. Abortions have existed since the beginning of time. All it did was make them legal, which then made them safe. I interact with people constantly in the state of Kentucky who say, if I hadn't found your organization, I was going to do it myself. The majority of them who are already parents raising young children. Met a young woman last night who said the exact same thing, although she did attempt to give herself an abortion. So this is like, it's, across the country, across the world. People have been getting abortions since the beginning of time, and they always will. So it is the decision of folks whether or not they want to make that unsafe, whether they want teenage girls hemorrhaging in their bathrooms of their parents' houses from trying to give themselves an abortion, or they want them to be able to get that procedure, which is a common medical procedure, at a safe doctor's office.
We have under a minute to go, so I just want to get out with this question. Do you have concerns that Roe v. Wade could be overturned?
I do, yeah, absolutely. Obviously, if the Supreme Court, if the judges on the Supreme Court followed the law of the land, no, it would not be. However.
And Kent, same question.
Well, just because you don't want someone to live doesn't mean you have the right to take their life. Roe versus Wade will be overturned, and Kentucky will be a part of that.